All right. So the agenda is first we're going to talk about what the problem is. We're going to define the problem. I'm going to start by giving a bit of background, give an overview of what's already in the works to address some portion of the problem, and also talk about why that's not enough. Next, I'm going to talk about the vision, which if you guys have paged through the slide deck that's been circulating around, you probably have an idea of what's going on there, but I just thought I'd go through that in case there might be somebody out there not familiar with it. Then I'll talk briefly about the way that we see the approach to moving this forward, and then we'll open it up for discussion, which hopefully will involve identifying people who might be stakeholders in this moving forward, what roles the individuals and organizations may play, as well as hopefully some discussion of feasibility, like what's going to be what seems possible and what's not. All right. So we'll start this up with a discussion of what the problem is. So the problem is that the railroad infrastructure in Raleigh is limited. There's some limitations, pretty severe limitations. You see, this is the Peace Street Bridge, and we all know that a truck gets caught under there, at least maybe once a month. And that's because it's just such an old bridge. It's low, it's obsolete. It's a problem. And there are problems like this, kind of throughout the railroad infrastructure in Raleigh. So we'll just start from the beginning, that there's essentially 3 rail lines in Raleigh. The first one is the S line, which is currently owned by CSX. It was originally built in 1840, so it's really old. The next one is the H line, which is owned by the North Carolina Railroad Company and operated and leased by Norfolk Southern. And there's a number of Amtrak trains that run on this route as well. The last one is the NS line, which is owned by Norfolk Southern. They lease part of it to the Carolina Coastal short line operator. And this is the sort of a latecomer to the Raleigh Railroad scene, and it came on the scene in 1905. So these are all been here for a very long time, longer than I'd imagine any of us. So these rail lines all eventually lead in 6 directions away from Raleigh. They lead to different destinations. However, for at least a few miles in every direction from downtown, they run in roughly parallel redundant pairs. So we have the west, to the west, we have the Norfolk Southern, we have the H line and the S line, and that runs 8 miles in a corridor that's already shared. The 2 railroads have, there's 2 tracks in this railroad, and one of them is technically owned by CSX, and one of them is technically, for Norfolk Southern, although they operate it as a 2-track railroad. And it's been that way since 1864. So to the north, we have a 2-mile segment where the railroads run basically on opposite sides of Capitol Boulevard to a spot that's between Atlantic and Wake Forest called Edgerton, where they cross back over each other and head in opposite directions. And then lastly, to the south, we have, for about 4 miles to Garner, the railroads are not immediately next to each other, but they're pretty close together, right? They're about 1 or 2 miles apart from each other. So you can see that after that, once you get past those points, 8 miles to the west, 2 miles to the north, or 4 miles to the south, they diverge. But for those short segments close into Raleigh, they're running together. So what problems does this cause, right? So firstly, as I mentioned before, obsolete century-old rail infrastructure. It's been maintained. The freight operators, the North Carolina Railroad, they've been maintaining it. But it's still pretty much exactly where it was and very close to how it was when it was originally built. In some cases back in the early 19th century. And there's never really been an opportunity to rethink it, to rethink it and revamp it to keep pace with the way that Raleigh is growing, and has grown since this infrastructure was first put into place. So first I mentioned the rail grade crossings. Those are places where one railroad heading in one direction crosses over another railroad heading in another direction. And there's two of those. One of them up north is called Edgeton, and the other one is pretty much underneath the Boylan Avenue Bridge. In particular, the one at Boylan is a big headache because all of our Amtrak trains and all the future commuter rail trains will cross over this. It puts a speed limit on trains coming in and out of the Union Station area. It could potentially be a source of unreliability. They're expensive to maintain, so on. There's also a lot of road rail grade crossings. These are railroad crossings with gates and flashers. I count 13 within this area. I could be wrong, but there's quite a few of them. And in particular, there's several of them that are in rapid succession in downtown and near Lake Wheeler Road near Dix Park. There's also a lot of old, low, or even neither old nor low, but still narrow bridges. So basically, nearly every railroad bridge in this vicinity is obsolete in some way. Even the ones that were built in the 90s when they extended MLK Boulevard through the southern part of downtown, that one's only a single track bridge. But some of these bridges are more than 100 years old. In particular, I believe, I'm not sure whether the actual steel in place over Peace Street on the NS line is over 100 years old, but the bridge itself is that old, and it's got the clearance problems to show for it. Another problem is that one of these railroads, the NS line, but southbound out of Raleigh, it bisects Dix Park. Now, the master planners who have put together a plan for Dix Park have done a great job working around this. But working around this doesn't mean that they've achieved what an ideal configuration would be for the park if that railroad were either not there or were used for some sort of a more park compatible use. So it's definitely put a lid on, in some way, the potential of what's possible at Dix Park. There's also a couple of large yard facilities that that are seemingly underutilized at the moment. CSX is talking about selling off their turntable and part of their yards to a developer. Norfolk Southern has tried to move traffic away from their yard, which is called Glenwood Yard. All in all, these yards are becoming less and less relevant to railroads' operations, but they're not taking up any less space. And just the overall redundancy of having two parallel lines heading in opposite directions. That is also just, do we really need that? So now I'll switch gears and talk about the greenway situation in Raleigh. So Raleigh has awesome greenways. It was a leader nationwide, and particularly in the Southeast, in setting up a greenway plan and a greenway network. And they're awesome. The trails, they're really heavily used. They're fun. It's a really great way to both get around and have fun. But there's some problems. First of all, they were primarily conceived as recreation, which means if you see on this map, a lot of them kind of squiggle all over the place. They don't necessarily go in a straight line from one place to the other, which is what people want to do when they're actually trying to get somewhere. The network is pretty sparse. Comparing the yellow lines on this map with the white lines, which are the roads, you can see that there's comparably very little of these dedicated bike trails through town. A big problem that I've heard a lot of people talk about lately is how most of these greenways follow waterways. They follow creeks, they follow streams, they follow rivers, and that means that they flood. And floods mean that they get damaged. It also means that they're in the same right of way as sewer lines that have to be maintained and replaced. And a lot of times the trails get closed for sometimes months or years on end while that maintenance is happening. Another consequence of the fact that they're in waterways is that they only go by neighborhoods and dense areas by accident when there happens to be a neighborhood near a creek or near a stream that has a greenway. Another thing I've heard people complain about is that there's very poor greenway access between downtown and North Raleigh. And even worse, there is zero connections to the neighborhoods south of I-40. There are no greenways within the city limits of Raleigh that connect between the neighborhoods north of 40 and the neighborhoods south of 40. So yeah, these are kind of what I'm drawing as missing links in the Greenway network. So next I'll talk about what is currently planned. So something that I understand is underway to some extent is that the state is looking at purchasing the S line from CSX. Some portion of it, I'm not sure whether it's the portion just north of Raleigh or whether it's the entire thing all the way down to Hamlet or wherever. I'm not sure what portion is on the table, but that's under consideration right now. Another thing is somewhere along the lines of 8 or 9 years ago, there was some discussion about high-speed rail coming through Raleigh. And as far as I understand, that's still in the cards. There was a lot of back and forth about trying to find a route for that to come through Raleigh. And eventually we settled on the NC5 route, which is shown on a map here. Another thing that's happened, okay, but some things have happened since then that have maybe merited reconsideration to some degree of those plans. One of those is that Norfolk Southern has leased their NS line north of Raleigh, or actually I believe it's past Edgeton, to a short line operator, which is the Coastal Carolina Railway. And furthermore, it seems that as of last year, they're making some noise about trying to abandon completely Glenwood Yard. I think they tried operating without it for a little while, and it didn't work because of the difficulty of making the connection to this line. But it's something that they've shown at least some interest in. So there may be an opportunity to, talk to them and see if they're willing to consider something that can benefit the entire city. And then to the south, we also have the question of commuter rail, which that's one of the, I believe that's planned to come online. I'm not sure how COVID has changed plans, but that's planned to maybe come online in the 2029 time frame. Various state rail plans have also mentioned the possibility of intercity rail heading towards Wilmington, Fayetteville, and Goldsboro or Morehead City. All right, so there's also several current plans that I think many of you are aware of. There's the Devereaux Meadows Park. That's on the northwest corner of Capitol Boulevard and Peace Street in downtown Raleigh. There's the Capitol Boulevard corridor study that happened several years ago for the corridor between downtown and 440, where they identified the Pigeon House Branch corridor as a possible Greenway corridor. And then, of course, there's Dix Park. Probably everybody here is aware of that to some degree. All right, so the vision is how we so there's a lot of things that are going on here that seem to be taking their own road, and I think that there's an opportunity by articulating a clear vision here to create something where the whole is more than the sum of the parts. If we take some of these things that are being treated as separate projects and consider them together, we may wind up with something that provides a greater overall benefit for the citizens of Raleigh and North Carolina. So the idea is in North, so the Southeast high-speed rail plan as it was written in 2012, 2014 timeframe, my mind is drawing a blank on the exact date, was to have the high-speed rail route follow this orange line on the screen here, but keep CSX using the red route and keep Norfolk Southern using the purple route, right? So where we currently have 2 railroads heading north out of downtown, what we would wind up with is actually 3 separate railroads within 1,000 feet of each other heading north out of downtown Raleigh. So my question, the question that I kind of immediately came up with on that, which I understand there was some consideration given to this at the time, but that if we're going to do that, why don't we just, if we're going to build a new 2-track railroad route for the high-speed rail line, why not make it 4 tracks and then relocate CSX and Norfolk Southern onto that same route? And particularly given how CSX has shown some interest in selling some of their facilities, some of their land off, and Norfolk Southern has shown some interest in, leasing out their lines for operation to short line operators, and indeed even shutting down Glenwood Yard. This may be more of a possibility than it was back then. So that's something that needs to be revisited. Another thing that I always found mystifying was that the NC5 route for high-speed rail has this zigzag, where it zigs and zags back and forth several times in some 45-mile-per-hour curves on its way from downtown towards North Raleigh. I always wondered why they didn't just have a single curve. It doesn't seem like there's really any additional property impacts. I looked at the grades. It seems like there should be no problem clearing this bridge over Wade Avenue. It is a crossing with a higher degree of skew, and bridges with more skew are a little more expensive. But at the same time, that would not be a significant number as far as I can tell in relation to the overall cost of this project. So the other possibility is with both of these freight yards possibly up for downsizing or even potential abandonment. There's a potential to extend the street grid through them and either redevelop them as far as either residential or commercial or even some open space component in those yards. Another piece of this is that I think it would be possible to leave the old Norfolk Southern line in place, basically where it is, relocate the trains off of it onto a new route, and then turn the old Norfolk Southern route into a trail, into a rail trail. The benefit that this has, so there's the Pigeon House Branch Corridor, which is going to be parallel to this, but that's in a floodway. That's going to be subject to the same flooding problems that greenways have all over Raleigh. Railroads, when they were built, were typically raised well above the flood levels of rivers and streams. And furthermore, the Pigeon House Branch Corridor ends at Peace Street, whereas the Norfolk Southern Rail Corridor penetrates deep into downtown. So there's a possibility for having a greenway corridor that goes deeper into downtown. All right, so the NC5 option called for a long viaduct next to Glenwood South. Something that I'd like to be considered for that, particularly if we're thinking about making this a 4-track route or a multi-track route that can accommodate CSX and Norfolk Southern trains as well, is the idea of retail under viaduct. So this is ubiquitous throughout the world, but very seldom found in the United States for whatever reason. I'm not exactly sure why. It seems like it's a shame, but I was able to find one. There are examples here and there, and here's a particularly attractive example in Chicago of where there's a retail building that's underneath the elevated on the north side of Chicago. But here's another attractive example from Zurich in Switzerland, and here's something from Hiroshima, which is a place where I lived for a year. This is a little bit more mundane, a little bit more, just kind of banal in appearance, but it definitely is a much more pleasant face to put on a railroad line, an elevated railroad line, than either putting parking spaces underneath it or just slapping it on top of an embankment. Some other things about viaducts is that viaducts are sometimes elevated lines are sometimes perceived as a blight or a barrier, but they're actually not. They're actually the opposite. They create an opportunity for new connections, for vibrancy. They can make an area feel much more open. The higher the viaduct is, this is counterintuitive, but the higher the viaduct is, the more open it feels, the more light it lets through, and the less noise that gets down to the surface. If you built it high enough, there's a possibility that it could even be built above buildings along West Street. Occasionally, viaducts are built above buildings. That's not very common from what I've seen, but there's a possibility. It's a chance, just something to bring up. All right, so to the south, this is something that's a little bit more sort of came out of my own head, but I'm not really sure how much of this is possible. But this is a similar approach for consolidating the two southbound railroads out of downtown Raleigh onto a single route. This would involve building a bypass line to connect from the NS line to the H line, somewhere south of downtown, most likely somewhere south of I-40. From what I can see, there's several possible corridors. Each of them have their upsides and their downsides. One of them mostly sticks to I-40, so it doesn't have that many impacts at all. but then it does have a big impact to the possible downtown South redevelopment that's being considered by John Kane and others. Um, then there's another one that's kind of in the middle. That's actually the shortest distance as the crow flies, but it might have some potentially worrisome impacts to a cemetery or to some lower income housing. And then there's a further south option that goes entirely through an industrial area that would be the longest, but would also allow for the greatest length of the NS line to be converted to a trail. But in any case, this links a lot of different items together, a lot of different important locations together south of downtown Raleigh. First, it links downtown to Dix. This would be basically an elevated promenade that connects straight from Union Station to Dix, and it would be I just think that would be just an amazing connection to have. And then it connects to both of the greenways that do exist and go east to west south of downtown Raleigh, which are Walnut Creek and Rocky Branch. And it also finally brings these trails south of I-40, which is a neighborhood that's been, in a way, unlucky or deprived of these wonderful amenities that other people in Raleigh have access to. Now, there is a gap between the end of the NS line south of Raleigh and the end of the line to the north. The question is an off-street connection possible here? This is where I can say that I think it might be, but this would merit a lot more this would need a lot more investigation. If an off-street connection is possible, I think that would be the way to go. But if it's not, how could you make an on-street connection that's as seamless as possible? All right. So maybe I'll pause here for just a second to see if there's any questions or clarifications that anybody needs.
Hey, Owen, I don't have questions. I just wanted to let you know that I have to jump off of this meeting. They usually schedule me 30 minutes back to back on the days that I'm able to join calls, but I want to let you know that I'm very interested in this project. And so I'm happy to do whatever I can in my position on council to bring things up at the table or move things forward. So I will follow up with you. And I think this is a great idea. And I just want to let you know that I'm going to be accessible and we will follow up.
All right, Jonathan, I appreciate that. We'll be in touch. All right. So next I'll talk a little bit about well, first of all, any other questions? Anybody else with another question? All right. So the approach is basically to copy our way to success. As I mentioned before, this is a pretty naive effort. Nobody here who I've discussed this project with is an experienced community advocate with experience in project management or anything like that. So the plan is to first request and enlist whatever help we can in any way possible. If you know somebody, let them know, see what they can do. If you know somebody who might be useful, try to reach out. And that's a big point of why we're having this meeting today, to try to get this idea in front of more people who might be able to help, who might have some feedback, who might have some role that they might be able to play in moving this forward. And another component of this is to look to similar successful efforts as a template. Probably the most famous effort that probably everybody is familiar with is the High Line in New York City. Another effort that's not necessarily a rail trail, but it's similar in that it involved bringing a large number of community members together, first from a grassroots level with Dix 306, and eventually bringing that through and following through to what we see now as the master plan for Dix Park. Another one is the Atlanta Beltline. That was fairly revolutionary, particularly when it was proposed first as a master's thesis in 1997. And then there's a few other projects that are maybe a little more obscure that I think are a little related. First of all was a Columbia, South Carolina railroad relocation, where they consolidated two rail lines onto a single route. I think that happened, somebody told me that happened when the Seaboard Airline and Seaboard Coastline merged at some point in the 1980s. But railroads can be convinced to move their trains from one place to another. Another one is the Wilmington Rail relocation, which that's something that's not complete. It's something that's underway, where the city of Wilmington is looking at moving trains onto the other side of the Cape Fear River and getting them out of the center of the city of Wilmington, where there's numerous grade crossings and trains move slowly and they block traffic and they're a real hassle and safety hazard and all that sort of stuff. So that's looking like it may potentially be a very expensive effort because it's going to involve a high-level bridge over the Cape Fear River. Perhaps this one's even larger in scope than what we're looking at here for this Raleigh Rail Trail project. And another one that's gone almost completely under the radar is the Southeast High-Speed Rail Greenway. So the high-speed rail line between Raleigh and Richmond is planned to use portions of the old CSX S-line right-of-way between Raleigh and Petersburg. But in other places where that line is curvy, it's going to be realigned. And what are they looking to do with those segments of right-of-way that are being abandoned and being realigned and straightened? They're considering turning it into a rail trail. So that's something that is local and relevant and very applicable. And if you guys are aware of any more examples, I'd love to hear them. So particularly though, the High Line left a trail of breadcrumbs for us to follow. They have a best practices toolkit for how to build an organization, build community support, how to conduct fundraising, how to involve various levels of government, how to be inclusive, and that sort of stuff. So it's a really great document. It's linked here. Anybody who's interested should probably take a look at it. But this is something that I think would be very valuable for us to use as a blueprint as we move forward. All right. So for this particular project, I see a number of these. I would see a number of stakeholders from the city to the state, with including elected officials, planning organizations like Campo, perhaps Go Triangle with the commuter rail planning. Obviously, developers would play a role, like the developers of Downtown South. Dix Park, since possibly this would involve a railroad going right, or a rail trail going right through the middle of Dix Park. And of course, most importantly, people, neighborhood advocates, community advocates, sustainability advocates, cycling advocates, you name it. There's a lot of adjacencies here. There's a lot of people who might potentially be interested. And if what we've seen so far in a community response to this idea is any indication, it seems to be the sort of thing that resonates with people. And lastly, so we'll come to the question of feasibility. And that's where we evaluate what is possible and what it'll take to make it happen. So there's a number of risks and challenges, everything from railroads to bureaucratic inertia, where there's plans tend to only pivot so fast. And then that's conflicting with the fact that there may be a limited window of opportunity in terms of the available land for a NS line to H line bypass in the south, planning for Dix Park, developments that may or may not get underway quickly. And this is something that might need to be on the table during the potential acquisition of the S line. I don't know how this might work into those legal negotiations, but there are some things that are rolling down the hill right now that we want to get this on the table and get this out there as quickly as possible. There's a possibility for naysayers and NIMBYs that exists for everything, but this is the sort of thing I feel is kind of like Dix Park, where it's kind of self-evident that this is the sort of thing that people might want to get behind if they can. In particular, most people would rather live next to an awesome trail than a railroad. Railroads are great. Most people would rather have a trail in their backyard than a railroad. Okay, so this is concerns. So these are the three top concerns that I came up with after reading through the best practices toolkit published by the Highline Foundation. And first is equity, right? So we need to be sure that if this is to move forward, it moves forward in a way that's as inclusive as possible and benefits all people. We don't want this to just benefit developers. We don't want it to just benefit other privileged groups. We want this to, you know, regardless of who you are, we want this to benefit you. There's the question of financing. Where's money going to come from? Even early planning, conducting things like feasibility studies, that takes money. So how do we get that? Can we apply for public funding? How much public funding can be expected? Do we need to fill the gaps with fundraising? Further along the line for implementation, is value capture like tax increment financing going to be on the table? Those are all things that we need to look at. Another thing is timing, as I mentioned before. Do we have a window of opportunity to move on this that may close? So we might need to move quickly. And the last one is feasibility. Are there any critical flaws? So I've kind of drawn this up to a rather high level of detail, but I want to emphasize the fact that I'm not really attached to any of those details, right? The key part is the vision, is creating something that benefits, you know, all Raleigheites, helps with sustainable transportation, and so on and so forth, and just basically makes Raleigh a better place. So with that, I'll just say that's it, and I'll ask if there's any further discussion or any comments. All right, so okay, so if there's no comments right now, so I guess we could take this time to start. As I mentioned, we could maybe go through some introductions, and you know, you can state, you know, who you are, what your role is. If you are here on behalf of an organization, maybe what that role is, and you know, any particular comments that you have regarding this idea, or you know, regarding feasibility, or just anything that you might feel relevant. I'll just open the floor up. I guess whoever wants to go can go ahead and start.
Hey, Owen, this is Mary Sell. I did have a quick comment. Have you been able to loop in any of the folks with the NC Rail Division, like the folks that help with the trains?
Yeah, Neil Perry is online from the NC Rail Division right now.
Awesome. Hey, Neil. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure for folks to loop in.
Yep. All right. So Mary, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself? Do you have any other comments on this?
Sure. I think it's a great idea. My name is Mary Sell. I'm the chair of the Bicycle and Pedestrian Commission for the City of Raleigh. Really excited to see this conversation continuing to move forward. And Owen, of course, appreciate you geeking out to the level you have. It's amazing. It's great. I think that for me, strategically, the things you were talking about, if the state does look to acquire the S line, I think it makes the most sense to be thinking about the ability to leverage investments like that to be as multimodal as possible. As we talk about like our BRT investments, all those types of things, we're always talking about first mile, last mile. And I think even though this could act as its own independent corridor for people who may be choosing to walk or bike, it could also be a critical connection for people to get to any rail service that did exist on these lines going forward too. So it could be a partnership versus a all one or all the other.
Yeah, thanks, Mary. Who's next? I could go ahead and call on some folks if that's necessary. Brandon, I know you're from Campo, the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization, and I understand that you've been involved in some discussions on the potential S-line acquisition. I wonder if you have any comments or anything that might be relevant, or any pointers as far as what we could look at moving forward.
Yeah, so I'm Brandon Watson. I'm a transportation planner with the Capital Area MPO. And yeah, I think this is a great idea as well. It looks like a really cool start. I love all the data you've gathered on this so far and the visuals and everything. I think that's really going to help move this idea along. And I would say Yeah, I've been involved with some discussions about the S line. They're currently just Neil could probably talk about it more than I could, but they're currently talking about purchasing that right of way, like you were talking about. So it's pretty early discussions. It's a great time to insert this idea into the discussion. So yeah, that's awesome.
Oh, and I think we lost audio from you. I'm not 100% sure, but I lost audio and then I started getting sound back.
Do you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
great. Sorry. So, yeah, Brandon, you mentioned Neil. Neil, I wonder if you have anything that you could say about the S line acquisition or anything else that you see here. You're obviously the railroad expert on here, and a lot of this depends on railroads. So I'm really curious to hear if you have anything to say. It says that the meeting will end for all participants in 5 minutes. So if there's
Neil
still
is
any
on
discussion to
mute.
go.
Neil, you're on mute, but also JKP has asked if we can go back to the map for background while we're discussing on the presentation. It looks like Neil's off mute now.
Okay, sure.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Oh, okay. So yeah, my name is Neil Perry. I'm the rail planning manager for the rail division. And first I'd like to applaud you. I have no idea what you do for a living. That would be interesting to know, but you've certainly done a considerable amount of homework, and I'd like to applaud you for that. Specifically, and I mean, I can monopolize this conversation, and I'm not going to do that, not the time or the place, but I will say regarding the Wilmington rail alignment and the potential purchase of the S line, let me just say that those are not inevitable. And I'll probably just leave it at that. A lot of things have to go right for either one of those projects to happen. So I guess that's probably all I need to say about that. They're not inevitable.
All right, thanks. I appreciate that. Yeah. My understanding of how a lot of things work is when there's political will and possibly money and funding behind it, a lot of things can happen. But it's, as you mentioned, certainly not inevitable. So it never hurts, in my opinion, to have a vision, even if you can't realize all elements of that vision. There's it never hurts to be thinking like that. It never hurts to be thinking, trying to connect the dots, trying to look for adjacencies, trying to look for ways to wind up with more than the sum of the parts.
A connector to Dix, but the fact that it basically terminates to a transportation hub with Union Station and BRT, which is we're kind of on the heels of, and to think that someone could come from Charlotte or could come from the other end of New Bern on a bus and then take their kids to Dix Park, I think it's just a super cool idea.
Yeah. So okay. So somebody asked me to go back to the map. So I'm not sure which map you were talking about. Was it the north side map, the south side map, the overall rail line map?
think the overall one, I'm a visual person, so I was just asking because it's helpful for me to have the visual in front as we kind of discussed. I'm Jen Bergman, loud Twitter advocate for cool things in Raleigh.
Welcome. Thanks for joining.
I am excited about this idea. I am supportive of anything that gets greenways south of 40, whether they're tiny things or big things. So this is exciting.
All right, so there's the 3 rail lines in Raleigh, the S line in blue, the H line in green, and the NS line in orange on this screen. Yeah, and they all come together at the Boylan Y in downtown Raleigh, and then they all, go their merry ways in separate directions after a few miles out of downtown, but they all kind of follow corridors until that point. I imagine the reason that the NS line and the H line head in the same more or less the same direction south of Raleigh has something to do with topography, rather than heading due east. But I'm not really sure. I don't know, but it's just something interesting to look at. And then, since I believe you were talking about south of 40, see if I can go to here. So this is what I drew up. Just a few options, just a few possibilities for ways that you could thread a connector between the NS line and the H line south of downtown Raleigh. I have no idea how. Like the first one that came to me was the yellow one. The reason for that is because there's an existing bridge where Hammond Road goes over a spur coming off of the H line, heading towards Wilmington Street. So that's one of the roads that you have to cross already out of the way. So you could potentially cross over there, and this impacts few or no anythings other than maybe a couple parking lots, and then there's maybe 2 homes in the Carolina Palms neighborhood. I ran some numbers on the grades, and it comes out to approximately a 1% grade, which is feasible from a railroad standpoint. It actually depending on where you tie in to the NS line here, you could potentially even lower that to something more like a 3/4% grade over the length of this. Which so Neil, you asked what my profession is. I'm a computer engineer. I'm a software developer. I have, I took some courses in AutoCAD and that sort of stuff. I've forgotten that all a long time ago. Definitely not a civil engineer, but I'm very interested in this sort of stuff. I spent a lot, I read a lot about it. So anyway.
So can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear.
All right. So one of the things I just want you to consider for a moment. So we're dealing with four railroads here. Primarily, we're dealing with Norfolk Southern and CSX, which are both multi-billion-dollar Fortune 500 Class 1 railroads.
Yes, they are.
You're dealing with the NCRR, which is a private company whose shares of stock are 100% owned by the citizens of North Carolina. But they do have their own president and their own board of directors, and they are considered a private company. And then you have the Carolina Coastal Railroad, who, as you said, is a short line, and they do operate over NS track. So, but one of the things, when you start thinking about some of these ideas, you got to ask yourself, if you were the CEO of one of these Class 1 railroads, what's in it for them?
Yeah, definitely.
Why would that's a big and important question.
Yeah, so I've got several thoughts on that. Let's see here. One of them is this, right? So I'm sure you're aware that there's a bridge on the old Durham and Southern line on South Salem Street in Apex that recently has low clearance like this. And recently, I think last year, a truck carrying some heavy equipment was driving down South Salem Street, and it caught the bridge. It knocked it off of its footings, and they wound up having to replace the entire substructure of the bridge. I mean, I don't see how in any world a low clearance, possibly 100-year-old viaduct is in the long-term best interest of a freight railroad. So that's one component of it. So I recognize this isn't the strongest bargaining chip, but it's something, right? It's something that's in it for them. Another component is that they have been making moves towards decreasing their operations at Glenwood Yard. If they were able to cease operations there, then they have a lot of acreage in one of the most expensive neighborhoods of Raleigh that they could then convert to cash, redevelopment. That is tremendously valuable. And they may find that the value of doing so is worth the potential loss of this rather peripheral facility to their overall operations. Another part of this is the Boylan Diamond. The Boylan. So I'm aware that back in 2002, during the Tier 1 environmental impact study for the Southeast High-Speed Rail Line, they proposed an option that would have replaced this diamond with a series of turnouts that would allow them to move it. But Norfolk Southern turned that down. They said, I don't want to go through that many turnouts. The way it is okay for me right now. But once you start talking about putting, I don't know the exact number, 40 more commuter trains per day across that Boylan Diamond, then you have to wonder if heads don't start scratching over at Norfolk Southern headquarters, and I believe they're in Atlanta now. You have to wonder if the heads don't start getting scratched. Is there some way we can get that out of our way or get out of the way of that? So I would say there's definitely not nothing. This is not just asking them to do something out of the kindness of their hearts. I think there definitely is some opportunity for this being perceived as a win-win, even in the boardrooms of railroads. Not having actually stood in one of those boardrooms, I can't say for sure. I understand they're very conservative. They tend to be some of the most conservative businesses you'll ever find. But that said, that's the sort of thing I think a feasibility study could address. And that's one of the things that I would say that's on the earliest, one of the earliest items on the agenda as we look for turning this idea into an organization. So yeah, I mean, those are definitely really valid concerns, and obviously the railroads aren't going to do something out of the kindness of their hearts. There's got to be something in it for them.
So when we have successfully done projects with Class 1 railroads, and when I say we, I'm talking the whole Department of Transportation, not just specifically the rail division. You would have to, for them to agree to things like this, you typically have to pay for the infrastructure yourself. You basically got to buy it and build it for them. Or they've got to make the determination, they've got to come to the conclusion themselves that the change in operation will financially benefit them, not only in the long run, but also in the short run, because being beholden to stakeholders and having a board, they are not only interested in long-term profitability, but they're also interested in short-term profitability. And the other thing you'll be facing, and you mentioned this yourself, so I'll use kind of your own words. A lot of things you'll hear from the railroad is, hey, we're pretty happy with the way things are now.
Yeah, I appreciate that feedback. So with regards to either, basically building the infrastructure for them, the one thing that I look at is that the rail division was already looking at building that NC5 line. I understand it's not in any actual, it's not in the transportation in the TIP or anything like that. But as a part of the environmental impact study, the rail division was looking at building a brand new 2-track route for the high-speed rail. And I'm just going from vague memories that this segment of it was estimated at somewhere in the neighborhood of $300 million. I have to imagine that the cost of adding a third and or a fourth track to that route would be something less than doubling the full cost of that, right? If you're already going, you wouldn't probably involve any additional property acquisition to add an extra track or 2 extra tracks. You've already got all the equipment there. It's probably going to be something less than a factor of 2 that the cost increases by. So there is a potential for economy of scale by leveraging the high-speed rail project that is already in long-range plans. It's not in the short-range plan, it's in long-range plans. But there may be some possibility for synergy, economies of scale there.
Yeah, I agree. And there is some possibilities there. But you are correct. It is not in the TIP, and the project cost that I think that study is from 2012, might be 2000. Some of those cost figures might be 2010, 2011. I don't honestly remember, but it wouldn't surprise me, if we weren't talking, adding, going. If you boosted that project cost up by inflation, call it 10 years, and then you add a couple more tracks to it, you could be talking about $1 billion project.
That's no doubt. It's not going to be cheap. No matter how you slice it, something like this is not going to be cheap. There's other possibilities floating in the wind, though. You've heard talk about a significant transportation component of a coronavirus stimulus. North Carolina came out pretty well, as you're well aware, in the last round of stimulus during the Obama era Great Recession stimulus, the ARRA. So there's a good chance that there may be something on the table for that now. There's also Brightline, Virgin Rail going around. They're talking about building on their own dime high-speed corridors in Florida and between Los Angeles and Las Vegas. And if you look on the list of potentially good corridors for high-speed rail, Raleigh to Washington, D.C. comes out near the top because of the potential synergy of operating as an extension of the Northeast Corridor. So if one of those companies like a Brightline or whoever were looking at doing something, this has got to be, I know that they've also looked at Atlanta to Charlotte. This has got to potentially be something that's on their radar, maybe further down the list, but there's opportunities. So I just want to be sure as those opportunities get explored that we're looking for ways to find further synergies, further things that can go together with it. Again, I guess the motto is to find things to make the whole more than just the sum of the parts. All right.
Yes, I completely agree.
All right. Is there anybody else who has any comments, any concerns? I understand there are some folks here who live in neighborhoods near these lines. If there's any other folks who might be interested in joining. One person who I got a pointer to invite was Valerie Jordan, who I believe lives in the Carolina Pines neighborhood and also is on the Board of Transportation at NCDOT. I was not able to get a response for her, but I'm still trying to reach out to her. I think she may have a good perspective on this. But yeah.
Yeah, I also live in Carolina Pines, which is how I got pointed. I can't remember if it was you or David or several people pointed this out to me. But and civil engineering background, architect now. but I think that the idea of how we, obviously this is a big question of how would this get funded, how would all the pieces come together. There's a lot of vision and imagination here, but I kind of just wanted to kind of bring up the topic of like how this integrates with more plans for development in the south of town, because I think you illustrated like pretty well how things could integrate in kind of on the Capitol Boulevard and like with the other projects that are happening around there, being mostly built out. But on the south side of town, we have a lot of development that is coming but is not yet there yet, like the redevelopment of Garner Station by Garner, the redevelopment of downtown South, the redevelopment of Dix, the South Sounders project. Like we have a lot of things that will be coming out in the vision for the next 10 to 20 years, and I feel like how we like articulate whether this works and how it works with that, and also in an equitable way. So there's a lot of concern about the equity around those development projects and traditionally poor neighborhoods in Southwest and Southeast Raleigh. And so like, I think anyways, I wanted to kind of bring that up as a discussion point. I don't know that I have any like right answers or anything like that at this point, but I think it's something that's important to talk about.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I mean, so frankly, I don't have any experience in creating an inclusive project. I mean, I understand that there's probably more to it than just saying whoever wants to participate and wants to have their voice heard can have their voice. I understand there needs to be outreach. And that's something that I'm going to be hopefully able to enlist some help from some folks. You know, like I said, I'm a geek fundamentally. I'm not that great at the human side of persuasion. I tend to be the type of person who's just going to bombard you with facts and ideas until your head starts spinning. But the human or emotional or connection side of persuasion is not an area of expertise that I really possess. I mean, I can fake it, but anybody, particularly anybody who knows somebody who's involved in community advocacy, any connections that anybody has here, to get to sort of tap in and sort of put the feelers out and say, hey, there's this idea out there. What do you think? Do you have any comments? What's your feedback? How do you think we should move forward? I mean, I think that would just be fantastic to have that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to kind of like we can offline that chat too about kind of ideas for who to reach out to and like better connect on this side of town into that community. But I think the idea of a rail trail through the middle of Dix is super great. But along with everything else at Dix, it has a lot to do with thinking through like just the concept of like clearing the rail line at Dix means putting more rail traffic to the east of town. That's an equity issue that we like kind of need to talk about.
Yeah.
And so in my head, I think that it's about bringing more people to the table, but I think it's also about like kind of fleshing out holistically what a developed South Raleigh, how this integrates into a more developed South Raleigh than anyone today can imagine. Because one of the things, having been involved in a lot of conversations about development in South Raleigh, Southeast and Southwest over the last like 5 or 6 years, is that the folks that are most vocal right now aren't going to be living here. They're going to be dead in 20 years. And so those are the people that are most vocal right now. And I'm just really blunt about that. But if we really want to talk about a vision for the future, like what is that future, and painting that picture, like you said, in a human way, is probably going to be crucial to pushing this idea out to a broader audience.
Yeah, thanks for that. So I understand there was a pretty concentrated effort for the Southern Gateway Corridor study that just recently wrapped up.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, first of all, I don't live in that part of town. And second of all, this idea was kind of bubbling around, but it wasn't sort of complete in this sense, ready to move on to the first step. So I kind of emailed it to some of the planners who are working on it, and they were like, okay, that's a nice idea. Moving right along, so that's where I say I tend to just throw facts and ideas at people and expect it to be self-evident and all that, so I'm working on that. That's why I'm having these meetings, to sort of build a community around this, build an organization, so that we don't, so that frankly that something can move forward. I think that there may be something here, something to move on. So I think by getting more people involved, more people supported, getting more voices, elected officials, planners, just community members, I think that maybe we'll be able to get a ball rolling in a positive direction.
Yeah, I know this is cool ideas, and I think one thing I would say about the Southern Gateway corridor study is that I think is one of the most critical, important things about it right now is not that anything particular on the adopted map. Like obviously those things aren't set in stone when they do any of those kind of comp plan amendments or anything like that. But I think that the process was precedent setting in the way that they brought people to the table. They like expanded upon that a lot with Dix, right? But also it changed people's minds about what could be possible. And so like I don't see anything obviously incongruent with an idea like this, and having, like Mary said, true multimodal transportation south of town. It would be a huge asset and is a goal of the Gateway plan. So I think it's more about picture painting, honestly, and that's what's really cool about your presentation is that you have enough detail in there that it seems possible, but also like it paints a good picture, and pushing it to paint a cool picture, like with all the different types of development and stuff like that are happening. Anyways, it's cool to me.
Yeah, so it's a little bit naive, but I think most visions start out naive to some extent. So hopefully, we'll be able to fill in the details, and there may be some elements that have to be left by the wayside along the way. That's fine. That's just the way that things go. But I just like to do what I can to move this forward. So Neil, while I've got you on, I just wanted to ask if you have just a question. I've always been curious since 2011, 2012, whenever this came out, on the NC5 plan, why does it have the zigzag, right? Do you know why it has the zigzag rather than just a single curve?
No, I do not know that.
Okay. I'm wondering if there's just something that I'm missing. But as far as I can tell, it should be pretty easy to build just a single curve, which with a 3/4 mile radius, which should be good for about 90 miles an hour, which trains aren't necessarily going to be going 90 miles an hour all the way up until Peace Street as they're coming southbound into downtown Raleigh. But if you have a northbound train coming out of Raleigh, and they can just open up the throttle as soon as they hit Jones Street, then you'll wind up going quite a bit faster, quite a bit sooner than having to cruise all the way up to Wade Avenue or beyond. In fact, all the way, 2 miles at 45 miles an hour. So that's, they say when you're planning stuff, the best way to increase your total time is to look at the slowest portions, to address the slow zones. And I've seen that that's what DOT's been doing on the H line, looking for the curviest sections and realigning them to be straight. And so that's just an approach that could maybe apply here, I guess. Yeah. So maybe there's no big reason why this happens to look like that. I mean, if I were to guess, it was to just bypass the Wade Avenue interchange, right? So it wouldn't have to be built over the top of that. But that may not be as difficult. That may not be as difficult as one might actually think. There may be plenty of places to put piers for that bridge, that it would work. All right. Any other comments?
So I have one more comment.
Sure.
I'm a stakeholder on the Great State Trail Plan that's currently ongoing. They're developing a long-range statewide trail plan.
Okay.
And I guess if you haven't found a way to get involved in that or become a stakeholder or attend a few meetings, you might want to try to do that, because at least some of what you're talking about is being discussed in the trail plan. And I guess what I'm saying is, if your idea is outside of the trail plan, then it's probably you're probably missing something.
Okay. Yeah, I wasn't even really aware of an effort to create a statewide trail plan. I know that there are some state trails, and state trails were established relatively recently, if I recall. The Mountains to Sea Trail and other things like that, East Coast Greenway, what have you. But I'll be sure to make a note to do that. State trail plan. Do you have? I'd appreciate it if. Do you have a particular contact who I should reach out to, or should I just Google it?
Well, I mean, you can just Google it, but
Okay.
I'm looking that up right now. Hold on.
Is it Catherine Zering? That's a name that was listed on ntdot.gov.
Meeting.
Yeah. That's the contact.
Okay, I put a link in the chat, in the WebEx chat for you, Owen.
Thanks. So lastly, I just like to ask. So that was a good point, Neil. Is there anybody else anybody on this call thinks should be here? We should make them aware of this idea? Like they might have valuable input, or they might be a stakeholder, or they might potentially have a skill or some valuable feedback. Either speak up or send me an email or anything.
Hey, Owen.
Yes.
This is Bonnie Parker from Campo. I hope you can hear me okay.
I hear you just fine. Thank you, Bonnie.
Hi. Okay. I handle public engagement for Campo, so I can't really say I'm an advocate one way or the other, or personal impressions of the idea of the vision. But my impressions from this phone call are very much that you've got a lot of the data gathered that you need to gather, that you understand that serious feasibility studying would be necessary in order to move even some of the dots forward.
Yes.
But the mind frame of it's a vision and accomplishing pieces of this would be success seems to be the right one. When you talk about actual stakeholders, I think like Jen was talking about, definitely the local community is going to be critical. Definitely you've already begun to build political interest, but I think I also wanted to talk to you about the intersection of some of the political folks with actual decision making. So for Campo, as you may or may not know, our board is actually made up of elected officials from the all around the region in the Triangle. And then our partner DCHC for Durham and Chapel Hill Carborough, they also have a board. So like the mayor of Raleigh and the mayor of all the smaller towns and commission members, they sit on the board. But I also thought it was a smart idea, the idea of Valerie Jordan for Division 4. Looking at the NCDOT board as well is a good idea. And then really staying coordinated with your planners like Brandon at Campo, but also the city planners and Neil, because bringing all those people together is even to get pieces of the dots are going to be really important. In addition to the rail plan, one other thing I wanted to suggest, although this does not so much address rail, it's kind of unique in North Carolina, but our Metropolitan Transportation Plan is the long-range plan for the region. And we have just begun kicking off the 2050 plan. The first part of that, like with any big master plan, is the goals and vision phase. And so literally tomorrow, our survey goes out to the community, and it'll be out for about 5 weeks, about the big goals of things that we want to accomplish. And somebody like Mary Sell is a big ambassador, and lots of different people in the community we try to link up with to help spread the word about these long range plans, because your project has to be in the MTP in order for it to then move forward in some of these different funding pools. So
Yep.
You were talking about even being a little bit outside of the tip, and that's where then you start dipping into the MTP. So I'd encourage you to we'll follow you and you follow us. But you, from a community building standpoint, professionally, you are connecting the dots that you need to be connecting. You just have to keep expanding all those little buckets, because you seem to be on a good path. I have no idea whether or not this will be successful in the long run, but you're laying the foundation.
So I just want to say that following the Highline Foundation's best practices toolkit really seems to be a good way. It's specific to infrastructure reuse projects. So it's got a lot of stuff. I don't know if you've ever looked at it before, but I would recommend you look at it if you haven't. It's pure gold. It's there's a lot of wisdom in there, a lot of good suggestions. So yeah, I appreciate that.
I'll check it out.
And I'm glad I'm recording this, because I'll go back and re-listen to it, because you gave me a number of, a few names, a number of organizations, a number of plans, opportunities. So I'll definitely follow up on that. And maybe, Bonnie, it sounds like there's a lot of really, really useful, information and knowledge with regards to community engagement. And and like I said, there's a group of advocates from the DT Raleigh forum, some people from Twitter who are interested in backing this. And I may not be the best person, giving my tendency to geek out on stuff, whatever, to head up community engagement for this. But it sounds like you've got a lot of good advice. So I wouldn't mind, maybe having some sort of a smaller session to get a little bit more information from you on your suggestions in that space.
Sure thing. I'd be happy to do it. And then Brandon also is really an awesome resource as far as planning goes. At Campo, he and I work really closely together on a lot of engagement stuff.
Okay.
As well as Crystal for the rail stuff. And unfortunately, I got to go talk to my DCHC counterpart right now, so I have to run. But Owen, best of luck, and I look forward to following this.
All right. Thank you, Bonnie. Have a good afternoon.
Thanks. Bye.
Hey, Owen.
Yes.
Thanks, Bonnie. So this is Brandon. So, I kind of wanted to expand on what Bonnie said. She's absolutely right. We're at the long range, transportation planning, and you're asking about other people that may need to get involved. You've probably already talked to, Raleigh Transportation, Raleigh Planning.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I reached out to them a little bit late. I don't think any of them were able to make it to this call. I didn't get in touch with them until a little bit late.
Right. So all of their plans kind of feed up into our MTP, our Metropolitan Transportation Plan. So, being able to actually get this down as a project and in a plan is really important, because then all of this new development that you're talking about, some of those costs may have to go to the development that's in a plan. Another thing I would say too is, I don't know if you've reached out to Raleigh Parks. I know they're doing their Greenway plan update right now. So just taking the opportunity when there's a plan update that this could be involved in, I think that's a really good opportunity to get that conversation in front of people.
So I dropped a link to this slide deck, more or less, with some summarization and stuff, into a public comment form for the Raleigh Greenway plan update. Sometimes things that you put in there can get lost in the noise. So probably reaching out directly to those folks would be useful. And I know that it seems that Jonathan Melton's taken an interest in this on council. I know that for something that's potentially big like this, and it may be a change of gears, having some sort of political support from elected officials behind it is helpful as well. I have on the agenda talking with, county commissioners, even state representatives. Those are things that all have to happen at some time during this process. So yeah, but the Raleigh Greenway plan update. Yeah, I understand it's been a while since they've updated it. Like 1989 or something was the last edition of the plan. So
Right. Yeah. And this is a great opportunity to have a conversation about something like this when they're updating a large plan like that.
yep. Thanks. Guys, I really appreciate all this feedback, all this information. This is great. Looking forward to it.
Hey, Owen, this is Dylan. Do you know what kind of operational impact that bridge outage had that you mentioned?
Well, okay. So that bridge outage, first of all, that's a branch line, very little traffic. It sees maybe two
Okay.
10-mile-an-hour trains a day. It wasn't the S line, it was the DS line, I think is what it goes by. But
How long did the repairs persist? Do you know?
a couple of months, I think. It's really fun. I wonder whether this is what happened. It's literally next door to a steel fabricator. So I wonder if they just said, "Hey, Peak Steel, will you build us some new girders for this bridge?" And they
Yeah.
just walked their guys out there, measured it up, and bam, they're could have been. I don't know, maybe not. But
Yeah.
they had new steel on site a month and a half or so, if I recall, after the bridge got messed up. I was wondering if they were going to just abandon that line outright because it sees so little traffic. Particularly, there's very few customers on the southern end of that line between Apex and Durham. As far as I know, there's only one. In fact, there was another one, Triangle Brick, that was up in the RTP area that got sold, and now it's a housing development. So yeah, I mean that line is not very central at all to CSX's current freight operations. They may see it as strategic for other reasons because it gives them a line into Durham or whatever. But yeah.
Well, my point with that is more around building. I guess the story, the justification. If there's a feasibility study that's done, to Neil's point of dealing with a Fortune 500 Tier 1 rail line, some of the justification may not come in direct cost savings necessarily, but as you know from your day-to-day career, doing risk assessments is pretty important, and across all different areas of
Absolutely.
business. So if that P Street Bridge is out of service for 2 months, and that probably is the best case scenario, if it has to be rebuilt and to put that rail line back in service, what's that impact, and what's the risk assessment to the operators and to the freight that traverses that bridge? That's a component, obviously, to the story. Some of it is shared maintenance costs if they're diverting to a rail line owned by another provider, sharing that some amount of those costs. And then you had mentioned the future traffic challenges at the Boyle and Diamond with additional commuter traffic in that area. That's one of those long-term planning considerations that I think helps our case. I mean, you already brought that up, but I think that putting all those together in a concise manner that speaks to their business is going to go some amount of way in helping justify it.
Yeah.
Maybe they say we're not worrying about it now, or we don't care about the risk. We'll deal with it if it happens. That could be the response.
Right. And I mean, yeah. And I mean, obviously when it comes to writing all those things up and sending that to the lawyers at Norfolk Southern or whoever, I'm way outgunned on that. I mean, I'm not I don't get taken seriously myself, but if this gets some support behind it, some city councilors, maybe, get some city attorneys to look at it and that sort of stuff. I don't know how that, I honestly, I'm naive. I don't know exactly how all that works. Maybe the DOT has some attorneys who could, take a look at that. But yeah, I completely agree. I think there's opportunity there. Like there's like particularly for Norfolk Southern, I think the value of capitalizing on the real estate assets. Not only is there something along, so for CSX, they own something like 100 acres in Raleigh Yard, which is in this vicinity right here. I don't know if you can see where my mouse is. They own something like 100
Yeah, I can see
acres.
mouse.
And then
Wow.
Norfolk Southern is something more like 30 or 40 acres or something like that. But it's a lot of land in a very valuable part of town. And on top of that, there's this land that's between where the NS line is today and the S line, right? There's this because the lines are separated, and this land becomes developable once the NS line is out of there, right? This land is really difficult to develop right now because it's sandwiched between two railroad corridors,
Yep.
and only accessed by Hargett Street, which is planned to be closed. So that's something that they have to, and they own Norfolk Southern themselves. Actually, own some of this land. It's not part of their right of way, but they own the
That's near
parcels
Y Hill.
there.
Yeah.
So that's yeah. Some of this stuff. It's not. It's actually not even inside the Y, right? The Y is this area. If you can see that yellow underneath there, this is just the NS line coming through and then connecting, onward towards Central Prison and Dixon beyond. The Y is this area. This is actually west of the Y.
Yeah, that's the line that butts up to the like the Y Hill.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
And,
Yep.
um,
Yep.
and the new parking deck and block
I
87.
might have been the person who told them what a Y was when they were renaming. Just saying.
Nice.
Cool.
That's awesome. And Neil has requested in the chat if he can get a copy of the recording. I think we've got two recordings.
Yeah,
two
I'm
sessions.
gonna have to splice them together somehow. But yeah,
Or
I mean,
two links.
I may just post it on YouTube or something like that.
Cool.
All right. So it looks like we're coming up on the end of the time. I appreciate. Thanks everybody for joining. Thanks for providing your feedback.
Great job, man. Good job.
We'll all stay in touch, and I'll keep you guys posted as this does or doesn't move forward.
All right.
Thanks all.